So we're going to do some discussions today, a little bit into obviously the nature nurture question, because that was your your discussion posts there. And I guess I just have to comment again. I was happy with a lot of those discussion posts. A lot of them were really good. I enjoy a lot of those, but some of them are kind of crappy. I mean, especially some of those responses. I agree. Period. That doesn't really fulfill the point of a discussion assignment. So I guess you're getting the grades. You see what you're getting, right? So we're going to talk about some biology. All right. We will start a little bit of genetics. We'll talk about neurons and how the neuron works. We'll break apart the nervous system a little bit. Talk about the brain in specific, and then as a little tack on at the end, we'll describe the endocrine system. Okay? So, oops. Okay. There it is. So we can see there's a variety of different brain scanning techniques that can be used to measure different activity in the brain while you're performing different tasks. Here on the top left is a PET scan, a positron emission tomography, and that's going to be measuring brain activity. You've got a CT scan here in the middle and an fMRI on the right. The CT it's pretty interesting, but we've got what's kind of interesting is like the CT scan. If you take a CT scan of a living brain and a dead brain, you would not know that one was living and one was dead. Now, over here, obviously, you will, because you can see specific areas of activity. And this is often blood flow or blood flow. So biological psychologists are often tasked with this idea: where is you? Where is you? Okay. And it's like, is it the brain? Is it the soul? Do you exist independently of your brain? Is it, whatever. So I want to talk genetics very briefly, just so that we kind of have an interesting place to start with. We find that if you want to answer the question of nature versus nurture, so what's more important in making you who you are, we need to get a handle on genetics just a little bit. All right, we'll just kind of a little tackle on it. So perhaps you know that inside of every cell in your body, there is 46 chromosomes, okay? And they come in 23 pairs. Except the gametes. The gametes, the sperm cells and the egg cells only contain 23 individuals, not 23 pairs, but otherwise. And each of the chromosomes is composed of DNA. So DNA is the smallest part of the chromosome. Well, it turns out that chunks of this DNA, sections of this DNA, work together. And so a gene is simply a section, multiple pieces of DNA which work together to perform a job, to code for certain things. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of it because I don't even know this stuff. I'm not a biologist by training, but genes code for protein productions, and we'll just go like that, right? We don't know that stuff. That's for if you're taking your biology class, you darn well better learn it. But for here, we're just going to say a gene is composed of pieces of DNA. Multiple genes make up a chromosome, and each cell has 23 pairs of chromosomes that generally match. The only one that does not match is in males. There is a pair which is unmatched. See, for females, it does match. So for females, they have 23 pairs that all match. They all match each other. It's just males have one of these pairs that is different, and it's X and Y, they're going to call it. We're going to come back to gender at some point. But if on that 23rd pair of chromosomes you have two X's, then you will be a female for what it's worth. And if you have an X and a Y, you will be a male for what it's worth. Okay? Now, we find that, parents donate, that is to say, the egg cells and the sperm cells will contain, 23 individual chromosomes, and they'll come together. But it's not that simple. It's actually pretty amazing how it's not just a simple 50-50, and you get more of this from mom and more of that from dad, and there's all kinds of dances and crap that goes on. Pretty cool stuff. So the genome is simply the entire collection of genes, right? The human genome has been mapped. That is a really big deal. We have laid out the entire human genome. And the human genome is basically a singular thing. I mean, every human being on the planet is like it is 99.9% genetically the same. I mean, we share that much in common. Okay. If your genome was changed by, like, what is this, a thousandth of a percent, then the DNA would not match in a crime scene or something like this. If it was about a 0.5% off, you could be a chimpanzee. 50% off, you're a banana. So yeah, that's a pretty big change there to a banana. I like that. We share half of your genes with a banana. And so a lot of people have been studying, what different genes do. And so there was this one researcher. This was awesome. They were actually studying a very, very, very simple type of a worm, okay, that had very few genes, right? It's a very simple structure. And these worms, they have a lifespan of 1 week, okay? So basically they're born, they have babies, they die. That's it. That's their lifespan. And so what happened was they were messing around with this very simple worm, and they were manipulating one gene at a time. Just what happens if I change this gene? What if I? They were actually turning them off. What if I turn this gene off? What if I turn this off? What if I turn those? And they got to one point, and they turned off a gene, and all of a sudden, these worms, they were living for 2 weeks, and they were just fully healthy worms. They were like 15, 16 days they were living. Since the average lifespan of this worm was 7 days, they turned off a gene, and all of a sudden their lifespan doubled. So very fascinating idea that there was a gene, and they called it the vampire gene. Okay. Vampire was a Frankenstein gene. I don't remember, but something fun. And so it was really pretty cool idea that these genes can do some pretty strange things. I think it was a vampire gene. I'd have to look it up. So yeah, no. Here, let's take a look here. So when you want to understand the contributions of nature and nurture, you need to go look at what we have to work with. We see identical twins. What happens is, and again, we have a chapter on development later where we'll get more details. A single egg is fertilized by a single sperm, and later on it divides and it develops into two babies. And these babies are exactly the same genetics. Their genetic code is 100% identical. In fraternal twins, what you have here is two egg cells are released by the woman, and each one is fertilized by a separate sperm cells. And it is possible, I mean, these are just like any brother sister combination. And it is possible, and it has happened, where one was fertilized by one father and another was fertilized by another father, and she gives birth to two babies with separate fathers. It can happen, absolutely. Okay. Now, what you find is that fraternal twins, though genetically are the same as any other brother sister combination, they will be more similar than other brother sisters because they're raised at the same time, right? They're raised at a time when their parents have specific resources. They'll be put into the same classrooms together. So they'll have many, many, many common experiences. Okay. So what happens is in some of this research, what they do is they study identical twins and they compare them. But even better, see the best one that they found in the Minnesota twin study. They found identical twins that had been put up for adoption, and these children had been adopted out into different homes. And so you now got a amazing opportunity to study nature versus nurture. You've got two human beings that share 100% of their nature, and they grew up in a different home. So what's going to happen? When they found these people, it was amazing how many things that they had in common. Personality traits. I mean, if one of them was outgoing, the other one's outgoing. If one of them is unstable, the other one is unstable. They had very similar things like divorce rates, things of this nature. They had very similar abilities or even interests and hobbies. They shared the same hobbies, okay? But they had never met each other. They didn't know who they were. So it was pretty amazing how powerful that nature really was. I mean, it was just amazing that one instant egg met sperm and a whole lifetime of experience. And yet, that one instant, look at this, preferences, fears, very specific fears. If one of them is afraid of cats, the other one's afraid of cats. I mean, just nutso stuff. Their brain waves, their heart rates. Okay. But when we looked at when people went back and looked at the data on these twin studies, though it was amazing how much nature was responsible, they found in some cases, these twins did in fact know each other. Okay, and so that they had been influencing each other. And sometimes coincidences happen. All right, I mean, I remember one. They were like, they were adopted into different homes, and they both of these adoptive families gave the kid the same name, and they married a woman with the same name, and they had the same job, and it was just like, wow, coincidences happen. Or and perhaps most importantly is that if two children are adopted from the same adoption agency, chances are they're going to go to very similar homes. All right. They're going to go to homes that are upper middle class, right? Because that's generally who adopts people. They're going to go to a similar geographic area because this adoption agency isn't going to ship people across the country. So they're going to be exposed to an awful lot of similar things. But still, I mean, the number of similarities was so amazingly high. So it's hugely high. So this is wait, where is it? Oh, okay, I do have it. Okay. So which is it? I mean, is it nature or is it nurture? It feels to me that the answer we need to look at is, nature endows us. That is, the nature you're born with limits what your environment can do. Okay. So you may be born with a particular potential for something, but the exact experiences in your environment will determine how much of that outcome will in fact express itself. Right. So, yeah. Okay. With adoption studies, okay, it's a little different than twin studies, obviously, but they've done similar work with adoption studies and looked at children and compared them. Who are they more similar to, the genetic parents or the adoptive parents? And across the board, in the same way with the twin studies, they were almost always more similar to the genetic parents than the adoptive homes. Okay, so it's hard to, well, then what's the point of trying to be a good parent? And well, okay, it does matter. There are definitely, in particular, things like religious beliefs, values, politics, habits, attitudes. These all seem to come as a direct result from environment and more specifically from parenting. So parenting does count, even though nature is really, really important. But in this notion here, we have I actually did some research like this when I was working on my master's degree. But in this study, you see the rat on the left he's living in an impoverished environment. Oh, he lives all by himself. Ooh, standard laboratory cage. On the right, these rats are living in an enriched environment. They have toys to play with. They've got other rats to play with. I mean, they got a fun life. So what happens is, after these rats have lived in here for probably 30, 40 days, I can't remember the exact number. What happens is that here is a neuron. We're going to talk about neurons today, but a neuron is a cell in the brain. And so what happens is that this neuron has what we call dendrites and axons. Dendrites and axons are what's going to connect this neuron to other neurons. Okay, that's what makes you smart. Well, look at this. These rats that had all kinds of enriched experiences, this is what their brain looked like. Okay, and so yeah, early experiences radically impacted the way that the brain looked afterward. So nature and nurture both do most certainly have their effects. But I can tell you this one is frustrating as a parent. Oh, parenting does matter. Are you ready? Parenting matters, but peers are much more important. Um, it's just there was just one study. They found some kids that would not touch broccoli. They just would not eat it. And their parents eat it. See that? It just but they won't touch it. Or you can imagine, oh, I'll give you $1 if you eat the broccoli. No, I'll give you $5. I'll give you a bag of cookies. And the kid's like, no, I ain't touching that. Now, what you can do is you take that little kid that just would not touch broccoli and put him down at a table where other kids are eating broccoli, and what the kid's going to do? They're just going to pick it up and go, oh, okay, I'll eat that. It's like, wait a minute, mom and dad who are taking care of you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you won't listen to them. But some other random 3-year-old kid that you've never seen in your life is eating it. And so you're like, okay, I'll try it. Yep. That's how it works. Okay. It's pretty crazy. Or here, it turns out that the accents of immigrants, immigrant children rather, even though they are exposed to their parents at home and often extended family with grandparents and everything else, they pick up the accent of the school that they go to, the children in the school they go to. So it's huge. It's huge. Okay. Immigrant children very often just 100% abandon their home culture and pick up the culture of their peers. So it's really a powerful thing. And this is why it is important. See, when I first moved to Texas and I needed to find a place to live, DFW is pretty big area. I'm like, where am I going to go? And I hate to say it, but the number one consideration I had to use when I moved to DFW was the school district. I had to make sure that my children were going to a school where the majority of the children would have similar attitudes as I would have to ensure that they would not get a bad influence from the other students in the school. I hated that. Oh, I hated the house I lived in. I'm done now. I'm done. So you find that nature and nurture are not like set in stone. That they interact with each other. That genes can be turned on and turned off based on environmental conditions. Like in the world of animals, the fur color can change. All right. So the genetic code for fur color can be switched every single season. Wow. Okay. Or epigenetics. This is so cool. This is some newer area in the field of genetics. So we said the genome was sort of like your entire genetic layout, your whole code. The epigenome is basically, very simplistically, a series of switches on top of the genome that can be turned on or turned off. And one of the most well studied of the epigenomes is the one for cancer. So that your genetic material, you have a code for cancer in your genome. But if the genetic switch is off, then it will never express itself. However, if you expose yourself to certain environmental pollutants and toxins, that can trigger the epigenetic switch to turn the genes on. Okay. And it's really kind of an interesting idea that you could be running around with all kinds of potential that is not being expressed. And so, yeah, it's an odd thought right there. Yeah. Yeah. It's cool, and it's really complicated, but it's really cool. Okay. All right, cool. So that's just a broad nature nurture thing, but neurons. Y'all know about neurons? Anybody know anything about a neuron? I'm actually just taking the attendance here while I'm waiting for y'all. Basic stuff, okay? Okay. Basic stuff is better than nothing. Okay. All right. So, well, we're going to talk about neurons, and it's really pretty cool. A neuron is a cell. So, if you ever took your biology class and you learned about, I don't know, endoplasmic reticulum, and I don't even know what the hell's in there. It's all in there. Okay. Whatever you learned in your biology class is all in there. But that's not what we're interested in. Okay. What we are interested in is the fact that neurons are special because they do one very specific thing. They transmit information. Okay. They transmit information. So here is a very pretty neuron. Now, neurons have all kinds of weird shapes and angles and but this is a nice clean one. Okay. A clean neuron. So we can see here that this neuron has a cell body, right, with a nucleus, right? We're familiar, I hope. And coming off of this nucleus is this axon. Okay, we can see this axon coming out. The axon has terminals or out here at the bottom. Okay. We see that the axon is covered with a myelin sheath, right? Kind of a layer of fatty tissue. And what happens is that this neuron is sitting here in the with thousands of other neurons. Okay, so that over here you're going to have other neurons that it's connecting to. In other words, a neuron here is going to send the signal down, an electrical signal. This neuron is going to receive the electrical signal. This neuron is going to send the electrical signal, and then each one of these terminals of the axon is going to connect to other neurons. So it's going to receive a signal, it's going to send a signal, and it's going to move through. Okay. There are billions of neurons in your body. The majority of the neurons that you have are, in fact, in your brain and spinal cord. But there are neurons in other parts of the body as well, including the heart in particular, but mostly the brain and the nervous system. We see here that the myelin sheath that you see on this axon over here, it's a product, is not, I don't have it listed here. This right here is a glial cell. This is a glial cell. And so the myelin itself is not part of this neuron. The myelin is produced by a separate cell that is doing this job. Okay. So here's an image. I've had this image for 20 years in my slides, and it's a beautiful one. I ain't changing this one. We can see what I've got here is this is a sending neuron. This is a receiving neuron, right? It's sending a signal, it's receiving it. Okay. And you see right here where the axon terminal comes down and touches the dendrite of this neuron. We see, so here is the axon terminal from the sending neuron, and here is the dendrite on the receiving neuron, right? We see that they don't actually touch each other, okay? They come incredibly close to each other, but they do not touch each other. And so now this little square here is going to be blown up over on the side picture, right? And so what happens here, and I'll try to keep it as simple as I can without losing the story. What happens now is that this space in between these neurons, the sending neuron, the receiving neuron, this is the synapse. This synapse is where all the action happens. Okay, all the action happens. So keeping it somewhat simple, when this neuron sends a signal down, okay, the signal enters this terminal here. And what it does is it causes these little vesicles. You see these little synaptic vesicles. They're filled with these little things called neurotransmitters. And so when the electrical signal comes down, it signals the release of neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters are in here floating in liquid, right? There's liquid inside there. And what's going to happen is the receiving neuron is going to have these little doors, for a lack of a better word. Here is a door that is closed. You see that? It's a closed door. Because it's a closed door, you see the little purple circle, can't get in. Door is closed. But when a neurotransmitter goes there, it's a key basically, and it opens the door. If the door is open, the sodium, in this case, purple circles, positively charged sodium, can go through. Okay? So without the neurotransmitter, it can't do anything. And so what's going to happen here is, do I have a good one? I don't have a good one. So what happens here is, again, trying to keep it as simple as I can without losing it, is that there is a lot of different things going on at this point. I teach a full neuroscience class every year, so I know this much about the process, and this is the process. But what's happening is that there's sodium out here, there's positively charged potassium, there's negatively charged chloride, there's all kinds of stuff going on. But what happens is that the liquid that is here, outside the cell, is different than what's inside the cell, right? It's got a different concentration of stuff. And it turns out that inside the cell is more negative. And y'all remember from somewhere, positives are drawn to, positives and negatives want to go together. They want to balance. They want to equal each other out. And so what happens is this sodium out here, right, which is positive, it wants to get in because inside is negative. It wants to be in there, but the doors are closed and it can't go in. As soon as the doors are open, electromagnetic force is going to just push those, so bang, bang. Now, I'm not going to, because there's so many different ins and outs, but it's really very simple. It's just like, positives are drawn to negatives. That's it. That's what it really comes down to. And it is the movement of these ions back and forth that is going to create the electrical signal. Because remember, it had to get a signal from somewhere, right? The signal gets generated, fires. Signal gets generated, fires. And it is the movement of these ions that's going to generate that signal. And it's really pretty fascinating is that it's, the biggest two ions involved in this process, the biggest two, are sodium and potassium. And so what happens is when this neuron, right, when it fires, okay, great, it fires. But if you want that neuron to fire again, it has to reset, right? You have to close up those doors, you have to pull out, and you have to get rid of the sodium, move the potassium, get it back where it was. And so what happens is that a neuron is in its resting state, it receives a signal, it fires. Then it must reset itself back to its resting state before it can fire again. And a neuron can do this 1,000 times a second. So it can fire, reset, fire, reset, fire, reset. And so the firing of a neuron takes really no energy at all because it's just electromagnetic force. It just happens. But resetting a neuron so that it can fire again is incredibly expensive as far as calories goes. It's a very, very expensive process to reset the neurons back to their original resting state. Okay, that's good stuff. The synapse, the neurotransmitters, yeah. Okay. Just different images I've gotten from different sources over the years just tells the same story. Yeah, here. In order to reset itself, not only does it have to get rid of the sodium and the potassium and stuff, but that neurotransmitter that's floating out there has to be removed. Because remember, when the neurotransmitter is out there, the doors are open. You cannot reset this neuron down here if the doors are wide open. So the first thing you got to do is get rid of the neurotransmitter so that you can reset it. Okay. And so this process right here called reuptake. This is a neuron that originally sent out the neurotransmitter. It did its job, and now it brings it back in. Okay. So reuptake. It's an interesting process that we're going to come across later. In particular, perhaps you've heard of SSRIs for treating depression, Prozac, some of there's lots of SSRIs, but SSRIs is serotonin specific reuptake inhibitor. So the R in an SSRI refers to this process and it prevents that process from occurring. Okay? Well, it turns out these neurotransmitters, right? Like I said, there's this little neurotransmitter. Well, there's thousands of different types of neurotransmitters, thousands. Um, and they're discovering new ones all the time. But the major players in the neurotransmitter game would be this acetylcholine is a big one. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that seems to be active almost exclusively at the junction between the nervous system and the musculatory system, right? So where the nervous system connects to the muscle system is where acetylcholine is active. You find dopamine. Dopamine is a very important one for a variety of things, including mood, sleep, learning, but it's also with pleasure and reward systems. So what happens is that if somebody, well, do I? Oh, I got it right there. Okay. And then so let me do the last big one: acetylcholine, dopamine, and then the last big one, serotonin. And serotonin is a neurotransmitter that is really often connected to mood and sleep and things of this nature. So what we find is that different areas of the brain, look at this, here is those areas that use serotonin. So this is where serotonin tends to be found, and those are areas associated with moods. Okay. Here's the areas associated with dopamine, and those are the areas associated with motor control. So you find that the function of the brain and the presence of these neurotransmitters are similar to each other. And so we could say that if somebody is exhibiting symptoms of depression, I predict that they will have relatively low levels of serotonin. Okay. That's just how it works. If somebody has low levels of serotonin, I predict they will have symptoms of depression. If somebody is exhibiting, say, for example, Parkinson's disease, which is an inability to control motor movements, if somebody's exhibiting symptoms of Parkinson's disease, I predict they will have low levels of dopamine. If somebody is, it's really that simple. And so we find so many medicines are designed about to look like neurotransmitters, okay, to imitate neurotransmitters. And so here what happens is this could be a neurotransmitter. So let's keep it simple and say, what did I say? Parkinson's disease. If somebody has Parkinson's disease, chances are they have low levels of dopamine. Okay. So let's say this is what dopamine looks like. All right. So this is what dopamine looks like. And so what happens is this is, the key goes into the keyhole, it opens the door, right? So here would be a drug which looks kind of like dopamine. You see that? But it's not the same, right? Look, this is two squares and a triangle, and this one's only got two squares. but it's close enough. And when the neurons receive this particular thing, this agonist in the form of medication that you've taken, your brain goes, oh, I think that's dopamine. And so all of a sudden your brain acts as though you have a higher level of dopamine, even if you don't, but it acts as though you do. If you have a problem where you have too much of a neurotransmitter, okay? So later on, we'll come across schizophrenia. And with schizophrenia, it's often connected to too much dopamine. Oh, you have too much dopamine. What are you going to do? Take a dopamine antagonist. And so this one is close enough that it can get in there and block this up, but it doesn't actually work. Okay. And so you have too much dopamine all floating around, but nothing can get in because it's all gummed up. Right. So we find that an understanding of this stuff is I find this stuff pretty fascinating myself. So as we said, the neurons are really all about communication and processing of information. And we'll talk about what it means to make you smart. Okay. But the neurons can't do their job alone. They need help. Okay. They need a support structure. And so for every neuron, depending on where you are in the brain, there's going to be 10 to as many as 50 of these glial cells to help take care of it. We already saw one glial cell here. These are the oligodendrocytes. Okay, these are a support structure. They create the myelin sheath. There it is, the myelin sheath there. We've got astrocytes, and there's a lot of different kinds, but astrocytes and oligodendrocytes would be the big ones. But they're going to do things like bring in energy, right? Because this dude's got to eat. They're going to get rid of waste, right? So as in any system, anything it eats has got to poop, right? So get rid of this neuron poop. It's also going to clean up dead neurons. If a neuron dies, it will digest the parts of it. It's pretty fascinating. These oligodendrocytes, what they do is they speed up neural conduction. Okay, when it's myelinated, it moves much faster. But what also happens is these oligodendrocytes can move this axon around, so that when you learn something new, the oligodendrocytes move the axon to connect to a new neuron. Wow, pretty cool. Pretty cool. Okay. Yeah, here's a complicated neuron. We've been talking about these very simple neurons right here. We call it bipolar because there's two ends to it. But neurons can be really freakishly weird. Really weird. Neurons have three different forms. You've got sensory, motor, and interneurons. A sensory neuron brings information in. So the sensory neuron is feeding in the texture, feeding in the feel, the coldness, whatever it might be. Motor neurons carry instructions back out. So my brain produces a signal, pick up the pen, do, do, do. The motor neurons are responsible for producing that motion. Okay? Interneurons are the ones that are in the central nervous system, in particular the brain and the spinal cord. And those are the ones that really do the job. Okay, so sensory neurons and motor neurons are just like almost like electrical wiring. Okay, just send a signal. Interneurons are the ones that are going to make you smart. So we have millions of sensory neurons, millions of motor neurons, but billions of interneurons. So here, So here might be an interesting layout of what do I got here? 14 neurons. And what's going to happen is these neurons are going to fire and form and connect to each other in a complex web. And this is really kind of interesting, is because, and we'll talk about this a lot in the developmental chapter. When a child is born, the neurons aren't connected to each other. It's just a bunch of individual neurons. As the child gets experience and learns, these neurons start to connect to each other. It is the connections between neurons that make you smart. It is not the neurons that make you smart. It is the connecting of neurons that make you smart. And the general law that describes how these connect to each other, it says, this is Hebb's law, neurons that fire together wire together. And so if two neurons are firing at the same time, they will connect to each other. Okay, that's all learning is. Okay, two neurons fire at the same time, therefore a connection occurs between them. So here's a good image to kind of show how this kind of works. So imagine you were so stupid to put your finger over the fire like that, okay? And you hold it there. And you see the red line, the red line is a sensory neuron. And so the signal for the heat and the pain is going to come in the red. Ding. It's going to go to the spinal cord. All right. There will be a single interneuron right there. And that will immediately send a signal out the motor neuron saying, pull back your finger. Now, at the meantime, this signal is also going to go up to your brain. But the deal is, because of this reflexive nature, you will pull your finger away from the fire before your brain ever reaches a signal, ouch, that hurts, right? You've already pulled your finger away by the time you realize there's pain involved, okay? So pretty fancy system right there. All right. Oh, my favorite, Homer Simpson. Look at his parts of his brain. The sleep part, the donuts part, the sweet beer part. Good job, Homer. I love it. All right. The nervous system, as we can see, is divided into the central nervous system, the sprain and the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is all the nerves out here. Oh, and by the way, a nerve is nothing more than a bunch of axons put together. So when you hear about a nerves and the nervous system, it's just bundles of axons of neurons. That's all you see. And we're going to definitely spend a whole section on the central nervous system because it's the big part of us. But the peripheral nervous system has two different components, the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. Autonomic are those things that are automatic, that just happen without your conscious control. Somatic are the voluntary movements. I choose to do this. Okay, that's definitely somatic. The autonomic nervous system is the thing that makes you breathe, makes you blink, makes your heart beat, things of that nature. Okay? And the autonomic nervous system is going to be divided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And we'll come back to this repeatedly, especially when we get to stress and health. But the sympathetic nervous system is the one that activates us. It gets us ready to get things done. The parasympathetic nervous system is that one that calms us back down and conserves our energy so that we have enough energy when we need it in case of an emergency or something. Okay. So, I just said all that. I wonder why I had two slides. I don't know. Okay, here's a picture. So the sympathetic nervous system gets us ready. So the old example, you're just walking around and all of a sudden there's a bear. Rah! A bear jumps out at you. Holy shit, where did the bear come from? Right? What's going to happen is your sympathetic nervous system is going to kick in. Your sympathetic nervous system's job is to get you ready for fight or flight. Okay? To either fight a bear or run away from a bear. I suggest running, but I don't know. It's up to you. So check it out. What's going to happen is the sympathetic nervous system is going to lead to dilating the pupils, right? To allow you to gather more information. It's going to accelerate your heart rate, okay? Because if there's a bear, you're going to have to be doing some pretty massive amount of work right now, okay? And in order for your muscles to function, they have to have oxygen. and that's going to come from the heart or from the blood. And so let's kick that heartbeat so that we can get blood out there, we can get the job done. It's going to turn off digestion, okay? Because at this point, you need every single bit of the energy you have. I mean, what's more important, dealing with a bear or digesting a peanut butter sandwich? It's like, I think I'll deal with a bear, please. Okay. It's going to, release glucose by the liver. Glucose is the sugar that is used by the body as energy, the main energy source, and a variety of other things are going to occur. And so we deal with the bear, and now the bear's gone. The sympathetic nervous system comes in and does much the opposite. Okay, does the opposite stuff. And it turns out that being in this state of fight or flight is very expensive. We cannot be in this state of fight or flight constantly. We will pass out and die. We will talk about that in the health psychology chapter because it definitely sometimes has happened that people have literally died because they remained in the fight or flight mode for too long and their body ran out of resources to keep them safe. Okay. All right. I like it. Okay. So let me see. Where am I at? Today is a rough day. I think maybe it's probably a good time to call it an early day so that we can go and get some lunch and walk the dog. Somebody's got to walk the dog. Who's got to walk the dog? I forgot. Somebody's got to walk the dog. Oh, yeah. Nicole's got to go walk the dog. I got it. Okay. So, good luck with that. Like I said, I'm not even going to pretend. I'm just going to pull out a puppy pee pad, all right, and hope that they have good aim. That's it. So, well, okay. So we have. Oh, do we have another come up this? Let me check before we all head out. Nope. Okay. All right. Sweet. So, obviously, you can do the discussion forum and the quiz now if you want to, but it's not due until next Wednesday. So, but anytime you can. So then we are scheduled to meet in NBC 115 on Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning, we're scheduled to meet in person. So I'm really hoping I mean, keep your eye out for any announcements to the otherwise. But at this point, we are planning on meeting in person. So I can't wait to meet all of y'all because I can't see much about any of y'all. So have a good weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday.